Brooke gazed at her reflection. Her eyes held fear, and a whirlwind of panic churned within her. How could this have happened? She asked herself. What do I do now? Oh God, Brooke said, sitting down on the bathroom floor. Of course, in theory, she knew how it had happened. But what to do next was an open question. Brooke picked up the pregnancy test and looked at it again, hoping for a miracle. But alas, it didn't happen. The two crimson lines indicated her pregnancy. I'm 43 and still clueless, Brooke thought. And what do I do now? Have a baby? She smirked. People will laugh. Some at this age babysit grandchildren. And I? Mom, are you okay? Noah, her son, knocked on the bathroom door and inquired. He listened for a response. Startled by the sudden sound, Brooke flinched. She had completely forgotten she wasn't alone in the apartment. Yes, sweetie, Brooke replied. I'm fine. Well then, come out, Noah said. We're running late. The woman let out a nervous sigh. Everything was happening at the worst possible time. But can an unplanned pregnancy at 43 ever be timely? Brooke chuckled to herself. Shaky-legged, she stood up from the floor. She urgently needed to discuss this situation with her husband. Henry was a practical and serious man who would reassure her, and together they would decide what to do next. Brooke quickly composed herself and exited the bathroom. In the hallway, her most beloved and closest people were waiting. Her husband Henry, son Noah, and daughter Eliza. Mom, where were you? Eliza impatiently asked, casting an annoyed look at her mother. Seeing her pale face, the girl furrowed her brows. Mommy, are you okay? Yeah, just a bit of low blood pressure. Brooke waved it off. It'll pass. Honey, maybe we can cancel everything. Henry approached his wife and hugged her. Forget all the guests. Your health is more important. No, we're not canceling anything, the woman said firmly. She looked at her husband with love. He was such a good, caring, dear man. How lucky she was that exactly 25 years ago, she became his wife. These years alongside Henry had flown by like a single moment. You both look so beautiful, Eliza said, with affection, looking at her parents. I dream that my relationship with my husband will always be like yours. Dear, your situation will be even better. Brooke approached her daughter and embraced her. All right, girls, let's save your rosy dreams for later. Noah looked at his family. If we don't hurry, my parents' silver anniversary will be celebrated without us. And we can't allow that. Henry looked at his wife and kissed her. The children exchanged glances and smiled. Once again, everything was calm in their family. Their parents were back together and happy. Brooke pondered. Maybe she wasn't necessarily worried about the pregnancy. After all, isn't everything that happens in life for the best? Yes, she and Henry had been having problems in their marriage in the past year. He had grown distant, withdrawn into his thoughts, and seemed to not notice her at all. Brooke even thought he might have a lover. The woman tried several times to talk to her husband about it, but Henry always brushed her off. He came up with various excuses for his behavior each time. He said he had work troubles, wasn't in the mood, or wasn't feeling well. Naturally, Brooke started looking for reasons within herself. At 43, she looked 35. Her figure was the envy of many young girls. Accordingly, she could afford a fashionable and stylish wardrobe. Brooke always took care of herself. She never allowed her roots to show, and she maintained her manicures, But in the last 2 months, it was as if someone had swapped out her husband. He was again the same Henry who adored his wife. He gave flowers and gifts for no reason, arranged romantic dates. Brooke sighed. If there was something between him and another woman, it had clearly ended. She was relieved. At exactly 6:30 in the evening, the family entered the cafe where Brooke and Henry planned to celebrate their 25 years of married life. The woman immediately headed to the administrator to confirm that everything was ready, leaving her husband to greet the guests. The children were busy preparing their surprise for their parents. Noah and Eliza decided to order a large doll in the form of a white teddy bear, which would gift their parents a romantic 2-week cruise. Watching her family, Brooke smiled. Almost involuntarily, she placed a hand on her belly. Maybe it wasn't so bad that she got pregnant at 43. This child would be perceived and raised differently. Mature and established parents could offer the child more than students. Now Brooke would gladly take the baby to developmental activities. She would have more time for homeschooling. After all, when she gave birth to Noah, she was only 19. She hardly knew anything. Well, her mother and mother-in-law came to her rescue at that time. Otherwise, Brooke would have gone crazy. At that moment, Henry's career was taking off, and naturally, he couldn't dedicate much time to the family. She had to thank Noah for being such a calm child. Unlike Eliza, who was a handful, her older son was 4 at that time, and he tried to help his mother as much as he could. Brooke was immensely grateful to him for that. Furthermore, thanks to her job, Brooke had recently read an article that children born to older parents tend to be more developed. This is because older parents spend more time with such children, leaving less time for themselves. All right, after the celebration with Henry, we'll figure everything out. The woman smiled at her farts. She scanned the room for her husband and saw him standing next to her best friend Elsie. They were clearly arguing about something. Brooke decided to approach and find out what had happened. I told you everything. Henry was angry. Don't even think about doing it. I warned you that if you decided the matter earlier, I would tell your wife everything today, Elsie said. What's going on here? Brooke asked with a puzzled tone. Approaching them, she looked at her husband, then at her friend. Nothing. Henry waved his hand. Everything's fine. Brooke, I've wanted to tell you for a while. Elsie, stop. The man interrupted the woman. I'm pregnant. Elsie looked at her friend and smiled triumphantly. Brooke didn't know how to react. Undoubtedly, she was happy for Elsie. But why did Henry forbid her from telling Brooke about it? Brooke approached her friend and hugged her. The woman genuinely rejoiced for Elsie. Even at 42, fate had given her a chance to become a mother. Elsie, I congratulate you. Brooke looked at her friend. Glancing around, she asked, why did you come alone? Where's your man? Brooke, do you really not understand anything? Elsie felt awkward. She had planned that Brooke would understand everything herself, and Elsie wouldn't have to explain anything. The thing was, despite everything, Elsie respected and loved her friend. But at the same time, she envied her happiness. The friends met 10 years ago when Elsie started working as a speech therapist at a daycare, where Brooke held the position of a psychologist. They quickly found a common language. At first, their friendship stayed within the confines of their workplace. But gradually, Brooke started inviting Elsie over, pitying her. After all, Elsie was alone. Sometimes, Elsie would spend Christmas alone, with no friends, family, or a beloved man. It happened that Elsie grew up in an orphanage. She knew nothing about her parents. Initially, Elsie was grateful to her friend for the friendship, but gradually, envy for Brooke's family happiness began to eat at her, and her rival set herself a goal to win Henry over. For 9 long years, she failed, but at some point, Elsie managed to seduce the man, and they had a short-lived affair, which ended at Henry's initiative. She sobbed and begged him not to leave her. She was ready to be his eternal mistress, but Henry was adamant. He realized that all this time, he had only loved his wife, and the affair with Elsie was just a mistake. She had simply been in the right place at the right time. Back then, Henry had work problems. He had no one to talk to. Brooke had gone away for a professional training, and the kids were busy with their own affairs. To distract himself from his negative thoughts a bit, Henry went to a bar to have a few drinks and relax. It was there that he met Elsie. At first, they just chatted about random things, but gradually their conversations became more candid and intimate. Elsie didn't hide her interest in Henry, openly stating that she had been thinking about him as a loved one for a while. Naturally, that evening ended at Elsie's apartment. Henry was infatuated with Elsie. It was as if he had found a second breath. The woman was unburdened by a husband or children, so she readily agreed to various propositions from Henry. He would take his lover far away from their town so that acquaintances and friends wouldn't know about his affair. After a while, Henry started realizing that he was tired of Elsie, despite her assurances that she didn't want him to leave his family. She increasingly hinted at a shared future. At first, Henry didn't take her words seriously. But one day, during a friendly gathering, Elsie supposedly jokingly suggested that Henry become a sultan and take her as a second wife. Brooke laughed at her friend's imagination. "And what, Henry, maybe you will," Brooke said, winking at her husband. "Elsie has already become like family to us." "No, my dear, I only love you." Henry's response was sharp. "I don't need a second wife." "Are you sure?" Elsie looked intensely at her lover. "I'm sure." After that evening, Henry decided to definitively end the romantic relationship with Elsie. She was against it. She tried to persuade him not to rush with the decision, but Henry was firm. "You'll regret breaking up with me," the woman warned as they parted, giving him a resentful look. She wanted to take revenge on him, to cause him the same emotional pain he had caused her. But at the same time, she wanted to do it in a way that wouldn't harm Brooke. Despite everything, over these 10 years, Brooke had become her closest person. Elsie felt like a deceitful scoundrel. She was ashamed before Brooke, but at the same time, she dreamt of destroying Henry. So, she didn't come up with anything better than to attend the celebration of Henry and Brooke's 25th anniversary to ruin it. "Elsie, what are you talking about?" Brooke's thoughts were scattered. Somewhere in the glimpses of her consciousness, she understood that Henry was involved in her friend's pregnancy, but her heart refused to believe it. "Brooke, go to the guests," Henry requested. "I'll explain everything to you later." "Henry, why procrastinate?" Elsie persisted. She knew that she wasn't welcome here anymore. It wasn't the right time or place to sort things out, but she decided to set everything straight once and for all. "I think your wife has the right to know the truth. What's going on here?" Brooke tried to buy time, although she was already starting to suspect who the father of Elsie's child was. "Henry, don't you have something to tell me?" "I do." Henry hugged his wife. "Brooke, I love you more than life itself. You're the only woman I want to grow old with." "Henry." "Brooke, the father of my child is your husband. I had an affair with him," Elsie said. She saw that Brooke was bewildered. Deep down, She hoped that her friend would kick her husband out after learning about his infidelity, and she would welcome Henry with open arms, especially since she was expecting his child. What? Everything blurred before Brooke's eyes, and she felt nauseous. She grabbed onto Henry to keep from falling. All this time, Brooke had stubbornly pushed away farts of her husband's infidelity. But now, hearing Elsie say it out loud, she was shocked. How can this be? Brooke tried to focus on her husband's face, but his features kept distorting. Suddenly, she felt hot, her face covered in sweat. "Brooke," Henry shouted. He sat his wife down on a chair. "Water. Get water quickly." Eliza rushed over to her mother with a glass of water. She tried to help her mother by getting her to drink some water, hoping it would help her regain her composure. "Henry, what happened?" Brooke's mother-in-law, Emma, asked with a demanding tone. She adored Brooke and always stood up for her. "Brooke isn't feeling well," Henry mumbled. He gave Elsie a warning look, signaling her to stay quiet. God forbid she opens her mouth right now. He was ready to protect his wife from unpleasant situations, no matter that he had created one himself. "Honey, what's wrong with you?" Brooke's mother, Jessica, approached her. She was frightened. "Henry, did you call an ambulance?" "Mom, we don't need an ambulance," the woman mumbled. "It will pass. Grandma, Mom hasn't been feeling well quite often lately," Eliza complained. "Sometimes she gets too hot. Other times she feels nauseous." "Sweetie, is it what I think it is?" Jessica looked at Brooke with a cunning expression. Brooke just nodded, afraid to move unnecessarily. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Henry asked. He didn't understand what his mother-in-law was implying. "Maybe it's time to stop speaking in riddles," Emma requested. "What are you thinking about? Just don't say that you didn't figure it out." Jessica smiled and looked intently at Emma. "Nausea, dizziness." "Ho, come on." Emma waved her hands. Then she looked at Brooke and smiled. "What a happiness. What's going on?" Henry exploded. Not only was he frightened by his wife's condition, but now their mothers were speaking in riddles. "Dad, everyone already figured it out here." Noah smirked. "It looks like you're going to be a dad again soon." Henry looked at his son skeptically. Could it be true? And if so, how did Brooke let this happen? She always paid close attention to this. "Brooke, why are you silent?" Henry turned to his wife. "Are you really pregnant?" "Yes," the woman answered quietly. She placed her hands on her belly, as if protecting their future child from the outside world. "Mommy." Eliza hugged her mother. "I'm going to have a little brother soon. And I hope this time he'll be normal, unlike some. And I hope I'll have a reasonable little sister, not like the existing one," Noah said, looking at Eliza. "Apparently, they gave us a defective product at the maternity hospital." "Am I the defective product you're talking about?" the girl protested. She raised her hand to hit her brother and tapped him on the forehead. "What are you doing?" Noah protested, rubbing his forehead. "Defective like us can do that." Eliza shrugged nonchalantly. "All right, both of you, calm down." Henry shouted at the kids. He certainly didn't need another argument between his son and daughter right now. What he needed was to sort things out with his wife. And it would be best if they did it in private. "Brooke, let's go outside for some fresh air." "Don't touch me," Brooke replied emotionlessly. She didn't want to communicate with her husband right now. "Sweetheart, but..." Don't call me that. Brooke stood up from her chair and glared at her husband. Leave me alone. Brooke, let's sort things out privately, Henry suggested. He didn't want their relatives to learn about Elsie's pregnancy, especially when they were just standing there silently, watching the couple. They were bewildered by why Brooke was speaking to her husband in such a manner. There's nothing for us to talk about, Brooke said. She felt repulsed just looking at her husband, let alone discussing anything with him. How could he lie to her so skillfully, pretend to be loving? What a hypocrite he had to be to not get caught by his family with words or actions. None of their family members even suspected that Henry had a mistress. And Elsie, too, was clever. Brooke considered her a close person whom she could always rely on. And that's exactly what her husband did. Are you okay, honey? Jessica asked her daughter. She exchanged a glance with Emma. From the first day they met, the two women found common ground and always supported each other. Yes, Mom, I'm fine. Brooke smiled. She looked at the guests. Why are you still standing here? The tables are set and filled with treats. Please, come in and have a seat. Brooke? Henry was taken aback. Would she really celebrate their silver wedding anniversary and pretend that nothing had happened? That's right. Jessica praised her daughter. We don't get to celebrate 25 years of married life every day. And who said we're going to celebrate our silver wedding anniversary? Brooke raised an eyebrow. I don't understand. The older woman was flustered. She looked at her daughter as if she were an alien. Brooke quickly walked to the table, poured herself a full glass of red wine, and raised it. Dear guests, Brooke said solemnly, I want to toast to my husband. I've always known that I can rely on Henry like a rock, that he's a reliable man, that my husband will never betray me. That's right. Jessica supported her son-in-law. She looked at Henry. What are you waiting for? Pour the wine into the glasses. Let's drink to you. Henry followed his mother-in-law's orders. He took a glass and looked at Brooke with pleading eyes. So, I'll continue, the woman said with a smile. Just this morning, I was making plans for our future with Henry, especially when I found out about the new addition to our family. Oh my God, I'm so happy, Emma whispered. My children, you are such amazing kids. But just 20 minutes ago, I found out that my dear friend Elsie is also pregnant. Brooke looked at the woman who stood slightly apart, silently listening to her rival. Elsie, come join us. Now we're in the same situation. Well, Emma clapped her hands. You got pregnant practically at the same time. That's what friendship means. Yes, my dear and beloved mother-in-law. Brooke smiled. We not only have the same due date, but our children even share the same father. Well, that's wonder. The meaning of her daughter-in-law's words dawned on the older woman, and she stopped short, not finishing her sentence. The smile slowly faded from Emma's face. So, it's the same father. She looked questioningly at her son, who stood red-faced with embarrassment. Brooke, why did you have two? Henry felt ashamed that his wife had exposed his infidelity for all to see. Dad, is it true? Noah asked and clenched his fists. He looked at his father with disdain and then at Elsie. Kids, let's talk about this at home, Henry requested. He wanted to leave the cafe as soon as possible. What do you mean at home? His son was determined. I think you'll have to live apart from us for a while, until Mom decides what to do next. Are you kicking me out of the house? Henry was shocked. He never thought he'd end up in this situation. Yes, he had suspected a few times what would happen when his family found out about his affair with Elsie. But even in his worst nightmare, Henry couldn't imagine that his own children would kick him out of the apartment. And where am I supposed to go? To the mother of your future child? Eliza said with anger. She wanted to insult both her father's mistress and her child. Her idealized picture of her parents' relationship had just shattered, as it turned out that her father was capable of cheating on her mother. And not only that, but also fathering a child with his lover. Eliza, this is actually your future sibling, whether a brother or sister, Elsie said. She felt offended for her unborn child. It was already clear that neither Noah nor Eliza would ever accept it. The girl nodded her head towards Elsie's belly. Will never become my sibling. But you accept the child of its mother, the woman retorted. And my little one is also your half-sibling by blood. Your blood runs in them too. Did you even realize what you just said? Noah smirked. Your child will never be our brother or sister. They'll always be an outcast to us. How can this be? Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. She had hoped that Henry's children would accept her unborn child as one of their own. Before you climb into bed with another woman's husband, lady, you should use your head, Emma said in a condemning tone. Especially if he happens to be your best friend's husband, Jessica added. And then to get pregnant by him, continued Brooke's mother-in-law. And then have the audacity to announce it out loud, Jessica said. And still hope that your child will be accepted into the family. Emma grimaced in disgust. I hate you, Brooke's mother said. Emma, how can you say that? Elsie whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. This is your grandchild. Remember this once and for all. The woman was resolute. I have only 2 grandchildren. A third one will come soon. But I will never accept your child. You can forget about it. Elsie looked at the people surrounding her. She had never felt so much hostility and hatred before. You are such cruel people, Elsie whispered. She turned sharply and ran out of the cafe. Run away, hypocrite, Eliza shouted after the father's mistress. Unexpectedly, the girl burst into tears. How would she live on, knowing that her father, whom she had loved and adored, was a traitor? After Elsie left, silence settled in the cafe. Each of the present people contemplated the complicated situation. Brooke tried not to cry in front of her close ones, even though her husband's betrayal only made it harder. Eliza, seeing her mother's state, approached her and hugged her. Mom, don't worry, the girl whispered into Brooke's ear. Everything will be fine for us. Our baby will be the most loved and cherished. Thank you, my girl. Brooke was grateful to her children for their support. It's just that this situation caught me so unexpectedly. Brooke, let me take you and Eliza home, Henry offered. Noah had been living separately from his parents for 2 years already. No, thank you. The woman was categorical. No need to worry, Noah said in a cold tone. He looked at his father as if he were a pesky bug. I'll take Mom and Eliza home myself. We don't need your help. Son, why are you doing this? Henry was disappointed by his children's reaction. Yes, he had made a mistake. Yes, his affair had led to Elsie's pregnancy. And Henry would deal with that on his own terms. But that didn't mean his children should suddenly treat him as a stranger. Henry was still their father, who loved them. How? Noah asked. his tone unchanged. Did you think betraying Mom, us, and getting away with it was possible? Not waiting for an answer, the young man continued. It's possible. And how? What are you implying? The man was taken aback. He looked at his son, furrowing his brows. As the head of the Occupational Safety and Health Department, I'll organize an inspection of the department you lead tomorrow, Noah warned. And you know perfectly well that I'll find violations there. Why would you do that? Henry was shocked. He had never thought that his son could be so vindictive. I want you to understand that you can't mess up where you're loved. Noah shrugged. The young man didn't want to reveal his true emotions, using his concern for his mother as a cover. In reality, Noah secretly and hopelessly loved Elsie. Yes, she was 18 years older than him, but that didn't bother him at all. On the contrary, it added, as Noah thought, a certain piquancy to his love. He had hinted at his feelings to his mother's friend a few times, but Elsie either pretended not to understand what Noah was saying, or she genuinely didn't realize the emotions the friend's son had for her. And now, learning that the woman he loved was pregnant with his father's child, Noah wanted to wipe Henry off the face of the earth, to destroy him. For now, his father was not a close person to him, but a rival. Besides, Henry deceived his mother, cheated on her, and he would pay dearly for that. Son, please don't, Brooke pleaded. Mom, do you feel sorry for him? The young man said angrily. No, but if you find something serious, other people might get hurt. The woman explained her position. You know perfectly well that your father will always find a way out, having connections within the plant's management. Noah fell silent, realizing his mother was right. He clenched his fists. He couldn't wait to do something that would hurt his father, not physically, but emotionally, so that Henry would suffer, not knowing how to get rid of the pain that enveloped him. Mom, let's go home, Eliza said, seeing Brooke in a bad state. You need to rest now. Let's go. The woman agreed. Brooke took her daughter's arm, and they slowly headed for the exit. Noah, giving his father an angry look, walked past him, brushing his shoulder. Henry felt hurt and pained that his family had turned away from him overnight. At first, he wanted to stop Brooke and beg her to forgive him, but he decided to give her some time to recover a little. Oh, son-in-law, what have you done? Jessica shook her head disapprovingly. I thought you were different. I even told my neighbors that my son-in-law should be listed in the Red Book as a disappearing species of men who don't cheat on their wives. And you? Oh well. The older woman waved her hand and headed out onto the street. She wanted to take a short walk and breathe some fresh air. Henry sat down at the table and covered his head with his hands. Just like that, his extramarital affair had destroyed 25 years of family happiness in an instant. Well, what's up? The miserable lover, clutching his head. Emmy asked mockingly. You should have thought before. Mom, please, don't start, Henry requested. He looked up and glanced at the woman. Give me some advice on what to do. If I were to tell you what to do, my upbringing wouldn't allow it, the woman said sternly. Yes, Henry was her son, and by all rights, she should have felt sorry for him. But she was also a woman who had been deceived by her husband, so she didn't feel any pity for her son now. After all, you yourself once felt the pain of your father's betrayal, and you repeated his mistake exactly. I disagree with you here, the man objected. Dad left for Aunt Freya out of love. He still lives with her. And I, I don't even know what got into me at that moment. I always said you should think with your head, not. Mom. Henry stood up abruptly. Yes, I made a mistake. But why humiliate me like this? Did you think you'd get away scot-free? Emma asked, placing her hands on her hips. No, don't even hope for it. She shook her head disapprovingly. I can forgive you many things, but what you did to Brooke is beyond me. Sorry, I need to be alone. The woman turned around and headed for the exit. Mom, I'll come over soon. The man called out to the woman as she left. Where? Emma furrowed her brows, asking. She turned around and looked at her son in surprise. To your place. Henry was taken aback. You heard. They don't want me at home. And why do you think I'd be glad to see you at my place? Emma inquired. I'm your son. The man muttered. So what? The woman was puzzled. I've gotten used to living alone, and any outsider in my apartment can disrupt my routine, even my son. But where do I go then? Henry realized he was left alone. Book your hotel room, Emma suggested, or find a daily rental apartment. After all, while cheating on your wife, you didn't bother to ask if it's permissible or not. Mom. The man raised his voice. He was already punishing himself for betraying his wife. There's no need to remind him of it every 5 minutes. And don't yell at me, the woman said sternly, not wanting to talk to her son any longer. Emma briskly left the cafe. Henry watched his mother go, losing his last hope of forgiveness. He would have to work hard to rebuild a good relationship with his family. As he exited the cafe, he saw Elsie standing by his car. She was clearly waiting for Henry, but he had no desire to interact with her, so he turned abruptly and walked in the opposite direction. He didn't know where he was headed. Henry simply walked wherever his eyes took him. His heart and soul yearned for Brooke. He knew he had hurt his wife, and Henry wanted to make amends with all his might, especially since she's carrying their child. Decision made. Today, he would give his wife some time to calm down, and tomorrow he would beg for her forgiveness. If needed, he would even kneel. During the night, Brooke slept poorly. Memories of the evening kept swirling in her head. Her friend, her husband. How could Henry betray her? And with her best friend, no less. How was she supposed to live now? And the child. What should she do about it? Get rid of it? No, definitely not that. Brooke approached the mirror and looked at her reflection. Don't worry, baby, Brooke whispered, caressing her belly. We'll be okay. Mama loves you and won't let anything harm you. The next day, Brooke went to work. Right after her, Henry entered her office with a large bouquet of flowers. How cliché, the woman snorted, looking at her husband. Put the flowers away if you don't want this bouquet to meet your face. We need to talk, Henry said with an authoritative tone. Brooke, I'm asking you forgive me. I love you, our children, and this little one too. I swear, I'll be a model husband. I'm eagerly awaiting the birth of our child. And you're not waiting for my child. Elsie watched from her office window as Henry entered the daycare building where she and Brooke worked. She understood that her lover had come to reconcile with his wife. After all, a man wouldn't just show up with a big bouquet of flowers for no reason. Elsie immediately came up with a plan to disrupt this reconciliation. She had been waiting for years for Henry to pay attention to her. So, Elsie would put in all her effort to ensure that the man she loved would be with her. And with their child. What do you want? Henry asked roughly upon seeing Elsie. He found her presence repulsive, let alone having anything to do with her, even if she's carrying his child. Yes, Henry wouldn't abandon the child. He would be there for them. As for Elsie herself, she was a closed chapter in his life. Saw you heading my way, so I came out to meet you. Elsie smiled. She was trying to ignore Henry's rudeness. I wasn't coming to you. I was going to my wife. The man turned his back to his wife's friend, indicating that the conversation with her was over. Brooke, I need to talk to you. Henry, darling, there's so much we need to discuss. Henry approached his wife and looked into her eyes. He saw tears glistening in her eyes. That meant not all hope was lost if she's feeling this way. And I have nothing to say to you, Elsie asked in an annoyed tone. She could see Brooke hesitating whether to talk to her husband or not. Knowing how persuasive Henry could be, she feared he might talk his way into her forgiveness. Elsie couldn't allow that. Her plans were changing drastically. If yesterday she was ready to be a single mother, now she wanted her child to grow up in a complete family. Elsie, leave, Henry hissed. He understood that his former lover's presence was only making the situation worse. But not too long ago, you were telling me something else, the woman said with a gentle tone. Henry understood that every word Elsie was saying right now was like a nail being driven into the coffin lid of his family happiness with Brooke. What do you want? Henry turned abruptly toward Elsie, his voice filled with hatred. I told you 2 months ago that it's over between us. I won't abandon the child, so you don't need to worry about that. Oh my, how you are talking now, the woman smirked. But when you were seducing me, you were saying completely different things. That you would leave your unloved wife, that you were tired of the children, that you've liked me for a while and dreamt of me at night. What nonsense are you spouting? Henry looked at Elsie as if seeing her for the first time. I told you from the beginning that I would never leave Brooke. Sweetie, I understand you want to reconcile with your wife, the woman said with a hurt tone. But why are you hurting me in the process? Oh God, how am I hurting you? Henry asked in a bewildered tone. By telling the truth. You were initially only interesting to me for. Henry was trying to find the right word to describe the emotion he felt back then. He wanted to convey to Elsie that he never loved her. A brief affair, which lasted more than half a year. The former lover said, Yes, I treated you poorly. The man sighed. But understand, I didn't love you and I never will. Only now have I realized that my heart will always belong to my wife. Even if Brooke never forgives me, I will only love her. Do you think that if you shed a few tears to your wifey, tell her how much you love her, she'll forgive you right away? Elsie smirked maliciously. You think your life will go back to normal, and everyone will forget everything? No, my child and I will be a constant reminder of your betrayal. Brooke will picture in her mind how you caressed me, whispered sweet words in my ear. Get out, Brooke said firmly. She realized Elsie was right. Her friend of 10 years had studied her too well. Brooke looked at her husband. Both of you, leave. Darling, just give me a minute. Get out, both of you. Brooke barely contained her anger. She didn't want to see either her husband or her friend. Elsie smiled vindictively, realizing she had achieved her goal. Now Brooke would think 100 times before forgiving her husband. She would remember her friend's words each time. Beloved, are you leaving? Elsie purred affectionately, looking at Henry questioningly. She could tell from his gaze that he wanted to bury her somewhere far away, so he wouldn't have to remember her. Brooke, know that I love you, Henry said as a farewell. looking at his wife. "Forgive me." Circumventing his former lover, Henry left the office. He wanted to leave the daycare building to avoid seeing Elsie. He regretted ever getting involved with her. But what's done is done. He would have to live with it for the rest of his life and bear the burden of his betrayal. After all, he not only needed to mend his relationship with his wife, but also with his children, who had made it clear they didn't want to communicate with him. "Brooke, we need to discuss a lot of things." Elsie sat down on a chair. "Go do your work," Brooke ordered in a commanding tone. "Don't tell me what to do," the woman retorted. Elsie couldn't stand being told what to do. "If you don't leave right now, I'll write a formal complaint about you disrupting my work," Brooke warned. Elsie quickly got up from her chair. "I've lived my whole life with Henry, like he was a stone wall. Walked around the daycare, looking down on everyone. Your perfect world is shattered now, and I'm glad I had a hand in it. Only my husband came to me asking for forgiveness, not to you. He swears eternal love to me and is ready to do anything just to be with me." Brooke smiled sweetly. "And you're just like a worn-out toy. You don't understand that. You're clinging to Henry and demeaning yourself." Elsie blushed. Anger and hatred were boiling inside her. Brooke understood that she had struck a nerve with Elsie by voicing the truth. The woman continued to smile as she looked at her former friend. Clenching her fists, Elsie stormed out of the office. How she wished she could wipe that smug smile off Brooke's face. Even in such a humiliating situation, Brooke was back on top. What did she have that Henry couldn't leave her? If not for her child, her husband would have definitely left her for Elsie. "Stop." The woman abruptly stopped. "The child. That's the key. If Brooke loses the child, Henry will leave her for Elsie. Unless her little friend isn't actually a sick woman who could lose the baby. Unless Elsie could help with that." Brooke sat at the table. She realized Elsie had spoken the truth. She would never be able to forgive her husband's infidelity. Every time she looked at him, she would remember. Unexpectedly, Brooke grabbed a sheet of paper and wrote a vacation request. She urgently needed a change of scenery to think things through thoroughly. "Mom, are you out of your mind?" Eliza asked, catching Brooke packing her things. "Where are you going?" "I need to rest and gather my thoughts." Brooke smiled. "Eliza, I booked a trip to a small sanatorium in the mountains. I'm coming with you," the girl declared determinedly. "No, there's no need." The woman approached her daughter. "Eliza, don't worry about me. Everything will be okay." Brooke stepped onto the balcony of her room and took a deep breath. The air was so clean. Before her, an enchanting landscape unfolded, rich with a variety of colors and shades. She was glad to escape her problems for a while. She would put all her efforts into not thinking about them. It was her time now to breathe in the fresh mountain air, walk, and enjoy a serene life for the next 3 weeks. Fortunately, as she had noticed, the sanatorium had its own forested area and a garden where various flowers and rose bushes were tenderly cared for by skilled hands. "Isn't it beautiful?" Brooke suddenly flinched. Turning her head toward the source of the sound, she saw a man looking at her. "Yes, it is," the woman agreed. She looked back at the mountains. She couldn't tear her eyes away from them. "My name is James," the stranger introduced himself. "Yay," Brooke muttered and went back into her room. She had come here to be alone, not to make acquaintances. She understood she was being impolite, but she couldn't help it. She didn't want to explain to a stranger why she wasn't in the mood for conversation. Brooke changed her clothes and went for a walk. The sun gently enveloped her with its rays. and she closed her eyes in pleasure. Living in the city, people often stop noticing such little things. At that moment, her phone showed signs of life. Looking at the display, Brooke involuntarily frowned. Henry was calling. Dismissing the call, she continued walking. Trying to detach herself from external irritations, she approached a large pink rose bush, plucked a flower, and smelled it. Pleasant scent, isn't it? Subtle, yet so alluring. Brooke heard from behind her. That James guy again. What do you want? The woman was resolute, hoping to deter her persistent neighbor. I wanted to get to know you, the man stuttered, then composed himself. I know we just checked in today. So, I thought maybe we could team up to keep from getting bored. Sorry, but I came here to relax and think. Brooke tried to be polite. She didn't want to make any acquaintances. You're missing out, the stranger persisted. In this sanatorium, you can go horseback riding and then unwind in the Turkish hammam. I'm 6 weeks pregnant, so horseback riding and hammams are strictly forbidden for me. The woman was curt. She was tired of enduring her clingy neighbor. I didn't mean to offend you. James blushed slightly. It was evident he was embarrassed by his behavior. Excuse me. I want to take a walk. Brooke headed towards the forest, where she could finally be alone. She walked along the paths that were specially made for the convenience of visitors. She savored the nature that surrounded her. Why do people, living in the city, rarely go out into nature? At least that's how it was with her and her family. After all, in the past, Brooke loved being in nature, in the woods or by the lake. It's a shame that outdoor trips had become rare exceptions. Unexpectedly, Brooke heard screams. Turning towards the sound, she saw a horse galloping towards her at high speed. She stood frozen, staring at the impending danger, unable to move. Only in the last second did Brooke manage to react, leaping to the side and pressing herself against a tree trunk. As the horse rushed past her, Brooke let out a breath of relief. Are you okay? James appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He looked at the woman with a concerned expression, as she stood there as pale as snow. Yes. No. Brooke stammered. Tears welled up in her eyes, releasing the pent-up emotions. James hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Should he embrace her and try to calm her down? But he didn't know how she would react. Or should he just stand there and watch Brooke cry? While James pondered, the woman approached him on her own and hugged him. She needed human comfort at that moment. She wished someone would soothe her like a little girl, pat her head, and assure her that everything would be all right. Gently, so as not to ruin Brooke's hairstyle, James started stroking her head. Calm down. Thank goodness everything's fine, he whispered into her ear. You did great, reacting in time. Yes, sobbed Brooke, the memory of the horse, charging towards her like molten lava from a suddenly awakened volcano, ready to engulf everything in its path, came rushing back. Do you want to go to a cafe with me now? I'll treat you to some tea. James decided to change his approach, hoping to bring Brooke back to her senses. Yes, like a little child, the woman sniffled. She took a handkerchief from her bag and wiped away her tears. At that moment, her phone reminded her of its presence once again. Brooke looked at the display and declined the call. A persistent admirer, James asked. My husband. Brooke waved her hand. Ex-husband. James looked at her with a questioning gaze, but decided to stay silent. If she wanted to, Brooke would share the story herself. Sitting in the cafe, sipping on calming tea, Brooke started to relax. She gazed at the mountains majestically positioned at the foot of the pine forest. She sighed. How wonderful it would be to stay here forever. What are you thinking about? James was sitting across from her, sipping on his coffee. I'm thinking that my life is like that cliff over there. Brooke nodded her head towards the rise where a small plane abruptly ended in a steep drop. After 25 years of family happiness, I ended up at the bottom. That's how humans are. They tend to trust those close to them. The man shrugged his shoulders. My wife, after 10 years of marriage, told me that I'm boring, obsessed with my career, and don't need a family. What do you do? Brooke couldn't resist asking. I'm a surgeon. James looked at the mountains. On the day my wife left me, we were planning a trip to celebrate our 10 years of marriage. We had booked a cruise around Europe. I called a cab, picked up our suitcases, and was about to go out. But at that moment, a close friend called me. He told me that his son had been in a terrible accident and was being taken to my hospital. He needed urgent surgery. I told my wife that I had to help my friend save his son. Grace shouted that my friends were more important than family. And if I went to the hospital now, our life together would end right there. Didn't your wife realize that a child's life was at stake? Brooke asked in a puzzled tone. She didn't care. James smirked and looked at Brooke. I told her I would join Grace immediately after the operation. But she was stubborn. As soon as I left the apartment, I was already an ex-husband. When I returned from the trip, my wife had divorced me. And you didn't even try to save the marriage? The woman inquired. What's the point? James shrugged. If the feelings and emotions that held us together for 10 years were no longer there, if Grace put her vacation above the life of my friend's son, why try to save such a marriage? That's true. Brooke sighed. She realized that James was right. The more she thought about it, the more she became convinced of her own stance on Henry. There's no point in trying to salvage the marriage after he cheated on her. Unfortunately, she would have to raise the child on her own. Brooke looked at the mountains. The couple sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. At that moment, Henry called again. I'm listening. Brooke decided to talk to her husband again. Brooke, I'm not feeling well. Brooke frowned. Why would her husband suddenly share his emotional turmoil with her? She wasn't feeling well either, but she wasn't eager to discuss it with him. Henry, call Elsie, Brooke advised. Maybe she can help you with your condition. After all, having a shared child can bring parents closer. Don't leave me. Henry's voice, once hoarse, used to thrill Brooke. But today, all she felt was irritation. Sorry, but I don't have time for this, the woman snapped. I have my own life now, and there's no place for you in it. Goodbye. Brooke, Henry whispered, but she didn't hear him as she hung up the phone. Husband? James asked, nodding towards the phone. Yes. He suddenly thought that I need to know he's not feeling well and is tormented by emotional wounds, Brooke retorted irritably. Maybe he really is not doing well, James defended Henry. After all, everyone has the right to make mistakes. I don't care about that now. Brooke shrugged and took a sip from her tea cup. I do love herbal tea. At that moment, an indignant woman in her 60s entered the cafe. In her arms, she held a tiny dog that was blatantly examining the patrons with its eyes. More specifically, their plates. The woman and her dog made their way towards a coveted target, a table by the window. No obstacles in the form of the cafe manager or waiter could deter her. A short man followed behind her. He preferred not to get involved in the conflict, knowing full well his wife's unpleasant character. I apologize, but I'm telling you again, no dogs are allowed in our cafe. The cafe manager, a young man of about 25 to 30, tried to sound confident, but the visitor's appearance left him bewildered and terrified. I'm telling you again, I don't have a dog, the woman declared in a tone that broke no argument. Well, except for my Liam, she added, nodding towards her husband and laughing. Her joke seemed extremely clever and funny to her. So, she turned to her husband and said, Liam, why aren't you laughing? I am. Holly, I am. Liam managed to produce a sound resembling laughter, looking at his wife, seeking her approval. Well done, Liam. The woman patted her husband's head. He visibly sighed in relief. Give me a menu, Holly declared loudly as she took her seat at the table. The waiter quickly complied with the visitor's request. He already knew that any delay could result in a long complaint from this unpleasant woman. The cafe staff were eagerly awaiting the end of the 21 days of this lady's stay at the sanatorium, hoping she would return home. 2 days of hell had already passed. Only 19 more to go. All right, so I'll have the salmon steak and grilled vegetables. Holly began listing her order. And for my dog, bring some boiled boneless salmon fillet. I'm sorry, but we don't have that dish on the menu. So, the waiter tried to object to Holly, but his words got stuck in his throat when his gaze met the visitor's eyes. Then you'll make it, Holly decided. Liam, what about you? Meat as usual. Darling, I wanted to try the salmon pasta. The man looked hopefully at his wife. How much does it cost? The woman quickly found the pasta on the menu and looked at the price. Fine. Not more expensive than the meat. So today, you can try it. Thank you. The man expressed his gratitude to his wife. Brooke and James exchanged glances. How could someone be so dependent on their spouse that they would endure such mockery? The waiter took their orders and went to the kitchen. Holly placed her dog on the couch seat and started pulling wet wipes from her bag. Liam, our little girl seems a bit scared, Holly asked with concern, looking at the dog. We'll have to take her to the vet when we get home. Why? The man looked surprised at his wife. Don't you remember how that awful horse scared our little girl? Holly picked up the dog and gave her husband an outraged look. How could he forget that? But I told you not to let the dog go when there are horses around. The man tried to reason with his wife. She barked at the horse, and it got scared and ran off. She almost got trampled. Luckily, she managed to get behind a tree in time. But she shouldn't be walking where they exercise animals, Holly retorted. Then she looked at her husband. When did he manage to drink that courage potion? And why are you defending that lady? No, Holly, I was just worried about our dog. Liam decided to deflect the situation, knowing his wife's strong-willed nature. After all, that horse could have trampled our little girl. And I think the same way, the woman agreed. But never mind. I already told off that instructor about what I think of him. He even dared to yell at me. But he picked the wrong person to mess with. She clenched her fist and threatened an invisible opponent. I would like to have a word with that lady too, so she knows not to walk where she's not wanted. Brooke looked at James, realizing that the obnoxious woman was none other than herself. Shall we leave? James asked quietly. Yes, I really don't feel like talking to her at all, Brooke whispered. Honestly, I'm afraid of her. James settled the bill, and the couple quickly got up from the table without saying a word and left. What a woman, Brooke exclaimed with horror. No kidding. James agreed with his companion. So, a horse almost trampled me because of a little dog. Brooke said. Suddenly, Brooke's phone rang. "Hi, Mom." Brooke was glad to hear Eliza's voice. "Hey, Mom." Eliza tried to sound cheerful, but Brooke could sense that something was wrong with her daughter. "How are you doing?" "Eliza, what happened with you guys?" Brooke asked directly. "Everything's fine." Eliza nervously laughed. "Why would you think otherwise?" "Sweetie, you don't have to hide the truth from me." Brooke sighed. "What happened?" "Mom." Eliza hesitated, unsure whether to tell her mother the truth or not. In that moment, she heard Noah giving instructions to his sister in the background. "Don't you dare tell Mom the truth." Brooke furrowed her brow. Why shouldn't Eliza tell her the truth? What were the kids not revealing? "Tell your brother I can hear him," Brooke asked Eliza. "And that you're not supposed to tell me something." Eliza hesitated for a moment and then replied, "Noah, Mom says she can hear you. And, well, I'm not supposed to tell her." Brooke's concern deepened. What could her children be keeping from her? Why? Eliza was flustered. Brooke knew this trait of her daughter's character all too well. If Eliza did something wrong, she always debated whether it was necessary to tell the truth or not. But then she took a deep breath and quickly, before changing her mind, revealed it. "I scratched your car." "What do you mean scratched?" Brooke was stunned. "You took my car?" "Yes," the girl admitted. "I wanted to practice driving a bit before my driver's test, to gain some experience." "Eliza, how could you?" Brooke sighed. "Did you take my car without permission?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Eliza mumbled. "But what's wrong with it?" Noah muttered in the background. "Witches are resilient. Even a big tank wouldn't do anything to them if it ran over them, let alone a small car." Brooke breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness her daughter was okay. The car was just a heap of metal that could be repaired. "All right, we'll discuss this situation when I get back." Brooke decided not to scold her daughter. After all, what's done is done. When she returned, she would explain to Eliza again that a car is a source of danger, not a toy. "Thanks, Mom," Eliza said cheerfully. "Relax and don't worry about anything. Bye." Before ending the call, Brooke heard Noah's voice. "I told you not to bother Mom. She won't do anything anyway. She'll just worry about." Brooke didn't hear the rest. Initially, she was alarmed by her son's words. Could something else have happened? But then she thought that Noah was probably scolding his sister about the car. Well, what could she do now? If earlier Brooke could have called her husband and asked him to handle the car, now she would have to deal with it herself. Throughout this time, James had been with Brooke, silently examining a rose bush. Seeing that she was on the phone, he asked, "Brooke, is everything all right?" His tone was concerned as he watched his companion closely. "Yes, if you can call it that." Brooke smiled. "My daughter is about to take her driver's test. Thinking she needed more practice, she took my car. And as a result, let's just say she dented it a bit." "Is she all right?" James inquired. It seemed like the demands of his profession were making their mark. "No, everything's fine." Brooke sighed. She only just realized what her daughter had done. Eliza could have hurt herself. Thank goodness everything turned out all right. "Indeed," the man agreed. "I've seen all sorts of things at my job. Sometimes patients are brought in that make your head spin. How could such a thing even happen?" "How often does that happen?" Brooke looked at the mountains. It was so good that she came here. The sight of the mountains alone was calming and brought her psychological state back to normal. Here, she would definitely figure out what to do next. Of course, the divorce with Henry was a done deal. Now she needed to figure out how to live alone with her child. Not often, but it does happen. James sighed. Cases vary. Some people drive somewhere under the influence. Someone suddenly feels unwell at the wheel. How does that happen? Brooke frowned and looked at her companion. Well, here's an example that happened today, the man said. Recently, friends called me and said a man was brought to our hospital after an accident. He was at work and suddenly felt really unwell, had a bad headache. He thought he was just really tired. And since he had problems with his wife, he decided to go home and rest a bit. So he did. Got behind the wheel and started driving. But during the drive, he felt so bad that he lost control of the car. The man said angrily. James couldn't understand people like that, who not only put their own health at risk but also harm others. Well, luckily, in this accident, only the man was hurt. That's why couldn't he have just called a taxi? When they brought the driver of the accident to the hospital, they found out that he had suffered a stroke. My goodness, Brooke exclaimed. Don't people realize they're voluntarily shortening their own lives? Imagine. James continued to be outraged. The mother of this man came and started justifying her son. She said his wife left him, so he didn't care about his health. And what will happen to this man now? Not even understanding why, Brooke asked. Well, if I don't get into medical terms, I'll just say that the doctors will treat the patient. The man shrugged. But the most important part comes after discharge, the rehabilitation. This is where the help of family and loved ones is needed. By the way, the man was lucky that he was brought to the hospital in time. Why? Brooke felt like a little girl. She didn't know anything about this illness called a stroke. Over the next 10 minutes, James explained to Brooke in detail about stroke and the dangers of impaired brain blood circulation. Brooke listened attentively. After all, life is long, and anything can happen in it. What if someday this knowledge would be useful to her? You talk as if it's the wife's fault that this happened to the husband. Brooke got angry. Maybe the man himself is to blame for destroying the family. For example, raising an eyebrow, the man asked, I left my husband just because he cheated on me with my best friend, Brooke said. And on top of that, she turned out to be pregnant with him, just like I was. My goodness. James even whistled in surprise. And can something like that really happen? Unfortunately, it can. The woman sighed. Elsie and I were friends for 10 years. I considered her part of our family. And she, it turns out, had been coveting my place for a long time. So what do you intend to do now? James couldn't help but ask. Keep living. Brooke shrugged. I have 2 wonderful children, and another one will be born in 7 months. Will you raise them on your own? Aren't you afraid? No. The woman nodded. 3 weeks flew by unnoticed. During this time, Brooke rested her soul, trying not to think about her husband or her former friend. The children called their mother every day, which made Brooke happy. Brooke and James formed a friendly relationship. The woman was glad to have met such a wonderful person. Throughout the 3 weeks, they walked through the forest and mountains, chatting about everything. Knowing about her companion's interesting condition, James chose easy routes. Saying goodbye to James, Brooke promised herself not to lose touch with him. After all, she had gotten used to him. James was an excellent conversationalist. He would listen and give sound advice. Brooke quietly entered her apartment, wanting to surprise her children. She knew they were waiting for her at home. Unexpectedly, she heard an argument between her daughter and son. "I told you not to tell Mom anything about Dad." Noah was angry. "Mom should know that Dad had a stroke," Eliza said. What Noah replied to his sister, Brooke didn't hear. Only one thought pulsed in her mind: stroke. Brooke entered the room and stared at the children, who looked at each other in confusion. The woman sat on the couch. Her head was spinning. Stroke. How could something like this happen to Henry? He's only 45 years old. After all. "Mom, how was your trip?" Eliza asked with a faint smile. She sat down next to Brooke. "Did you have a good rest?" "Eliza, what happened to Dad?" "What do you mean?" Eliza looked at her brother with an imploring gaze. "Mom, don't worry too much." Noah sat down next to his mother on the other side. "Dad had a stroke 3 weeks ago, but he's okay now." "Why didn't you tell me right away?" Brooke asked. She was bewildered and didn't know what to do next. "Mom, we wanted to tell you everything at first," Eliza sighed sadly. "But then we thought that you needed to stabilize your emotional state. If you've forgotten, let me remind you of your pregnancy. You can't get too worked up in your condition. If something irreversible had happened, we would have called you immediately." Noah added. "How is Dad feeling now?" Brooke asked. "He's much better now." Eliza smiled. No matter how angry she was at her father for his infidelity, the news about Henry's stroke shocked her. She immediately went to the hospital to find out about his condition. "By the way, Dad asks about you every day. Noah, can you take me to the hospital?" Brooke asked. "Yes, of course." The young man agreed. Brooke quickly changed clothes after the journey and headed to the hospital. She was eager to find out her husband's condition. As mean as it may sound, Brooke wanted to file for divorce as soon as possible. Without a doubt, she would offer him help to the best of her ability. But she had no intention of enduring his presence by her side. Mentally, Brooke already considered herself a free woman. Upon stepping outside, she saw her car untouched and undamaged. "Eliza, you said you scratched my car." Brooke looked at her daughter with a puzzled expression. "You see, I wanted to tell you about Dad's stroke back then, but then I changed my mind." Eliza shrugged. "So I had to make up the accident story." "I see." Brooke chuckled. Yes, despite Eliza's belief that she's a grown-up, she still remained a little girl who's always coming up with something. Arriving at the hospital, Brooke stepped out of the car. She took a deep breath. She hoped that Henry was doing better. "Brooke," she heard behind her. "What are you doing here? Are you okay? Is something wrong with the baby?" Turning around, she saw James standing behind her. He looked at her with a concerned expression. "No, I'm here for a different reason." Brooke evaded. "And what brings you here?" "I'm on duty." James smiled. Despite what anyone said, he loved his profession and the hospital he worked at. As they say, from the ship to the ball. Brooke summed up. "Yeah." James held the door open for her. "Please?" "Thanks, but I'll wait for the kids." She nodded towards Noah and Eliza, who were still in the car. "I understand." James shrugged. He hugged Brooke. "Okay, I better get going. If you need anything, call me. It was nice to see you again." "All right." Brooke waved her hand to her new acquaintance. She sighed sadly. She would miss the heartfelt conversations with James that she had grown accustomed to during her time at the sanatorium. Though on the other hand, they could meet up as friends at a cafe or somewhere else and share their news. Who was stopping them? As long as James was okay with it. The husband is in the hospital recovering from a stroke, and the wife is already spinning a romance on the side, Elsie said with a mocking tone, approaching her former friend. Don't judge people based on yourself, Brooke retorted. Between a man and a woman, purely platonic relationships can exist, like in our case with James. Well, Elsie snorted. You know, not everyone sees the bedroom as the main purpose of life, Brooke said with narrowed eyes. Sometimes you need to think about the soul. But why am I bothering? She shrugged. Do you even know about things like conscience, honor, and soul? Don't consider me a complete villain. Elsie got angry. While you were thinking about your soul at the resort, I was taking care of Henry. Well, there you go. Brooke smiled. So you did come in handy for something. So why are you lying? Eliza asked angrily, approaching the women. Mom, don't believe her. Wasn't that the case? Elsie asked, hands on her hips. You wanted it to be the case, the girl said with a mocking tone. But Grandma quickly kicked you out. I wonder when Emma finds out that her beloved Brooke is having an affair on the side. How will she react? Elsie squinted her eyes and laughed. I think it won't be anything good. Do whatever you want. Brooke waved her hand. But I'm not going to prove anything to you. Now step aside. I'm going to Henry. Making a point of bypassing Elsie, Brooke headed towards her husband. Why is it that people, when they see a woman with another man, immediately think they're having an affair? And yet, every time you have to prove that you're not a camel, or to be precise, that you're not the lover of that man. Friendship between a man and a woman does exist, after all. Mom, who was that? Eliza asked with interest. Who are you talking about? Brooke looked at her daughter with a puzzled expression. After the confrontation with Elsie, she completely forgot about James. Well, the handsome man you were talking to outside the hospital, Eliza reminded her. That's James. We met at the sanatorium, Brooke explained. Do you have something with him? Noah asked insistently, approaching his mother. Where did you get that idea? Brooke stopped abruptly. Well, he hugged you when you said goodbye, Noah said. All right then, my dear ones, Brooke said firmly. Remember once and for all what I'm going to tell you. James is a very good person who helped me restore my mental state, for which I'm very grateful to him. Are you telling us the truth? Noah looked at his mother intently. He wanted to believe Brooke, but it turned out that parents can do some pretty confusing things sometimes. Noah, I'm not crazy enough to have an affair on the side while being pregnant. Brooke harshly rebuffed her son. My head is in the right place. Besides, James is 10 years younger than me. And you know yourself that it's unacceptable for me when a woman is older than a man. Mom, is he married? Eliza jumped into the conversation. Divorced, Brooke quickly replied. Then she looked closely at her daughter. And why do you need this information? Just curious. Eliza shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, although in reality, she was quite taken by James, and she wouldn't mind starting a relationship with him. Eliza, he's 13 years older than you, the woman warned. She could see her daughter's interest in James, no matter how much Eliza tried to hide it. Mom, I was just asking. The girl waved her hand. She wanted to shift the topic as soon as possible. "Mom, there's Grandma." With a nod of her head, Eliza indicated the elderly woman sitting near the ward. Seeing Brooke, the elderly woman quickly stood up and approached her. "Brooke, what a tragedy." Emily embraced her and burst into tears. "Henry had a stroke. What are the doctors saying?" Brooke asked. She helped her mother-in-law sit down on the bench. "They say he has a long recovery ahead of him." The woman took out a handkerchief and wiped her tears. "Henry's right side was affected. He can hardly feel his arm. We don't know what the future holds." Did her son not know that his father's right side wasn't functioning? And what was Brooke supposed to do now? After all, she was determined to file for divorce. She had no intention of taking care of Henry. Of course, many would judge her after such a decision. But Brooke had warned Henry before they got married that she could forgive a lot, but not infidelity. "What are the doctors saying about this?" Brooke managed to ask, looking at her mother-in-law. "They say rehabilitation is needed, along with proper care." Emma was holding on by her last bit of strength not to cry. No matter how angry she was at her son for his actions, she would never abandon her only child in his time of need. Since the day Henry had a stroke, the poor mother had been sitting by her son's bedside, taking care of him. "I see." Brooke was disappointed. She sat down on the bench next to her mother-in-law. Where would she find the strength to prevent this situation from ruining her plans? "Brooke, I understand that my son messed up big time." Emma took her daughter-in-law's hands. "And you have every right to leave him. But I have a request for you." "What is it?" Brooke felt that her mother-in-law couldn't possibly offer her anything good. "Henry has been talking about you all this time." The elderly woman sighed. "Thoughts of you gave him the strength to fight his illness. I'm asking you not to divorce my son just yet. Give him time to go through rehabilitation and recover. The doctor said he needs positive emotions." "Emma," Brooke sighed. "Please understand, I won't be able to be in the same room with Henry, smile at him, and pretend to be a loving wife. I understand all that." Her mother-in-law continued to persuade Brooke. "You won't have to do anything. Just be there with him." "I can't do it," Brooke exhaled. "Before marrying Henry, I warned him that I could forgive anything, except infidelity. He knew that perfectly well. And yet he decided to betray me. I told you that your Brooke is a hypocrite and a liar." Elsie approached the ward. She was by her husband's side when he was healthy and making lots of money. But as soon as he became helpless, your Brooke found herself another admirer. And he's younger than Henry, by the way. "What nonsense are you talking?" Emma was taken aback. "I'm telling the truth." Elsie smirked. "Why don't you ask your beloved Brooke who she was with at the sanatorium?" "Brooke, is she telling the truth?" The elderly woman turned her bewildered gaze to Brooke. "I'm not in a position to have an affair on the side," Brooke said firmly. "Yes, I met a man at the sanatorium. He happened to be from our town. And yes, we spent a lot of time together, discussing many interesting things. But between us, there were only platonic feelings, so we stayed in separate rooms. We both have been disillusioned with love and our significant others." She looked at her former friend. "I have my wits about me not to jump from one bed to another. I respect myself, and I won't lose my mind and start a new romance without ending my relationship with my husband. Besides, I repeat, I'm in a very interesting condition. And James showed no inclination to get involved with a pregnant woman." Are you saying you are so virtuous and honorable? Elsie snorted. She understood that Brooke was right. It would be hard to have an affair while being pregnant. Why is it hard for you to believe that? Brooke said, squinting her eyes. You know what? I don't know how I managed to be friends with you for 10 years. Because during the time I spent at the sanatorium, not once did the thought of taking James to bed cross my mind. Sure, I believe you, Elsie said with a sarcastic smile. Then she looked at Henry's mother. Well, Emma, have you realized that your beloved Brooke isn't as virtuous as she claims? Emma slowly stood up from the bench and gave Elsie a disdainful look. Unlike you, Brooke told me the truth straight to my face about my son. So, are you okay with the fact that your son's wife won't be taking care of him? Elsie paled with indignation. She had hoped that Emma would see the hypocrisy that Henry had lived with for 25 years. Brooke has every right to do that. The elderly woman shrugged. Besides, she's pregnant now, and she shouldn't be lifting heavy objects. And you're not too old to do it yourself, Elsie retorted. It's my maternal duty, Emma said, raising her head. And it's my fault that I raised my son so poorly that after 25 years of marriage to such a wonderful woman, he cheated on her with. The elderly woman fell silent. She wanted so much to tell Elsie everything she thought about her. But suddenly a thought crept into her mind that if Henry was against infidelity, no matter how attractive Elsie was, she wouldn't have been able to seduce him. You know, you are not welcome here. It would be best if you left the hospital. Let Henry tell me that himself, Elsie said insistently. After all, I'm expecting a child from him. She patted her stomach. And I have the right to know about his condition. Emma, now you have a helper. Brooke smiled. And if you don't mind, I'll go home to rest. I'm feeling tired after the journey. Won't you visit Henry? Emma was surprised. Why should I? Brooke shrugged. He was so looking forward to your arrival. The elderly woman sat down on the bench. Today had been a complete surprise for her. Just this morning, she had hoped that Brooke would forgive Henry and everything would be fixed in their lives. But now she realized clearly that Brooke hadn't forgiven her son. Let's do this, Brooke suggested. I'll visit Henry a bit later, when all the other visitors have left. I'm not going anywhere. Elsie stood in front of her former friend, placing her hands on her hips. I have just as much right to be here as you do. No, you don't, Brooke smiled. But I won't argue with your right. Maybe it's even better that you'll be taking care of Henry. If, of course, he's happy with that. She looked at her mother-in-law. All right, I'll go to Henry's attending physician to discuss everything with them. Then I'll come back, and we can all discuss it together. Okay, Brooke? The elderly woman nodded. A small glimmer of hope ignited within Emma. If Brooke was interested in Henry's health, maybe not all was lost yet. Brooke went off to find her husband's attending physician. In truth, she wanted to get away from Emma as quickly as possible, so she wouldn't have to look into her eyes. She understood that the elderly woman hoped that Brooke would return to Henry. The young woman loved her mother-in-law, and she didn't want to deceive her. How Brooke wished she could go home right now to get some sleep. Instead, she was forced to walk around the hospital looking for a doctor. Brooke, the woman turned around and saw James hurrying toward her. Hello again. Brooke smiled. Still, what are you doing at the hospital? The man asked, approaching Brooke. Remember, you told me about the man who had a stroke in an accident. The woman looked at him and, after receiving a positive response, continued, "That was my husband." James looked at the woman attentively. He didn't understand the reason for her distress. He knew that Brooke was planning to divorce her husband. And at that moment, he had a stroke. But based on his examination results, Henry was on the mend. "Well, I invite you to our cafeteria for a cup of tea," James suggested. "And you can tell me everything in detail." "All right," Brooke agreed. She needed to vent. She realized that James was the best listener in the world, someone who would listen and offer advice. Entering the cafeteria, Brooke took a table. While James placed his order, she looked out the window. The weather matched Brooke's mood. It was overcast outside, but occasionally the sun peeked through the clouds, warming with its gentle rays. "Okay, here you go." James placed a cup of tea with lemon in front of her and got himself a strong coffee. "Tell me what happened." "I came home fully intent on divorcing my husband." Brooke took the cup and took a small sip. "But today I found out that Henry needs a long rehabilitation." And James listened attentively to his conversation partner. "You understand that I can't just abandon my helpless husband." Brooke was on the verge of tears. "Nobody is asking you to abandon him." The man shrugged. "You can help him with his rehabilitation without being his official wife, since that's what you decided." "What do you mean?" The woman furrowed her brows. "Brooke, you are like a little girl." James smiled. "Nobody is forcing you to live with your husband against your will. Yes, some people might criticize you for leaving a sick husband, although he's not that sick." "What do you mean, not that sick?" Brooke was shocked. "Emma said that Henry's right side was severely affected, and he can't even feel his right arm." "That's strange," James pondered. "If I'm not mistaken, just today, when I came to work, your husband's attending physician and I discussed how Henry got off lightly." "I don't understand anything." The woman shook her head. "Are you saying that if someone, in simple terms, is half paralyzed, that's getting off lightly?" "On the contrary, your husband, you could say, got off with a light fright, and he's recovering." The man frowned. He didn't understand what was happening. Just an hour ago, his friend Michael had clearly stated that the man with a stroke would soon be discharged as he had practically recovered from the illness. Yes, he would need to follow strict recommendations to prevent a recurrence. And now Brooke was saying that her husband's right side wasn't functioning. How was that possible? "Listen, let me clarify with Michael again, your husband's attending physician. Later, we can discuss it again." "All right," Brooke agreed. Buoyed by James's words, Brooke returned to her husband's room, where an anxious Noah waited her. "Mom, where were you?" The young man took Brooke's hand and led her into the room to his father. "What happened?" Brooke got alarmed. "The attending physician, Michael, is gathering all of us to talk about Dad," Noah explained. "We're just waiting for you." Entering the room, Brooke saw her husband lying in bed, his face pale and weak. Emma was bustling around, adjusting the bedding for her son. "Hello," Brooke said. "Brooke, my love," Henry whispered softly upon seeing his wife. "How I missed you." He extended his left hand toward Brooke. "Come to me." "Hello, Henry." Brooke approached the bed and sat on a nearby chair. She pretended not to notice the extended hand. "Did you rest well?" the man asked. "I did," Brooke replied evasively. She glanced at the doctor. "Michael?" "Michael, allow me to introduce you." Henry smiled. This is my wife, Brooke. Very nice to meet you. The doctor looked at those present. Well, is everyone here? Yes, all my most beloved and closest people are gathered, Henry said proudly. I want to talk to you seriously, Michael said. The thing is, in a few days, I'm planning to discharge Henry. So soon? Emma was surprised. What about his arm? I will explain everything now. The doctor was serious. The main goal when Henry was admitted to us was to restore blood circulation in the brain, which we essentially accomplished. Unfortunately, the catastrophe had already occurred, and some of the patient's cells were damaged, and we cannot bring them back to life. So now, it all depends on you, whether your loved one can return to his normal life. We'll do everything required of us, Emma assured the doctor firmly. That's wonderful. The doctor smiled. First and foremost, you must ensure that Henry is surrounded only by positive emotions. Under no circumstances should he be upset. He mustn't experience stress to prevent a recurrence. Don't worry, we'll do everything. The elderly woman nodded her head. Especially since positive emotions are guaranteed for me in the near future. My wife is expecting a child. Henry spoke. Excellent news. Michael smiled. Congratulations. Thank you. The man was proud. He was pleased that Brooke was expecting a child from him. Apparently, fate was on his side. Okay, let's continue. The doctor grew serious again. Henry's rehabilitation began as soon as we stabilized his condition. Upon returning home, the ideal scenario would be to send the patient to a specialized sanatorium. Cologne. Emma frowned. No. Michael objected. I believe the ideal scenario would be for you to go, Brooke. In your condition, it's better to be with your husband. But I can't. Brooke was in shock. I have work. Take unpaid leave, Henry suggested. I promise I won't be a burden to you. Just be with me. I'll think about it, Brooke replied evasively. I can go. Eliza, who had been sitting in silence all this time, offered. I have university holidays right now. It's better if it's the wife. Michael was firm. We'll decide at home. Noah saw that his mom was on the brink of a breakdown, and she couldn't afford to get nervous in her condition. The main thing is to remember that Henry mustn't get stressed to avoid another stroke. Michael reminded them. Okay. Emma smiled. Can we go? Brooke asked. She desperately wanted to be outside. The thought of her divorce being postponed was unsettling her. Yes, Michael nodded. Darling, won't you sit with me for just a little while? Henry asked plaintively. I'm incredibly tired. The woman stood up from the chair. I just returned from the sanatorium not long ago. I want to take a shower and rest a bit. Yes, of course, Henry agreed. See you tomorrow then, Brooke nodded. Accompanied by her children and mother-in-law, she left the room and sat down on a bench in the corridor. She reflected on how, knowingly or unknowingly, Henry had postponed the divorce for now. Brooke, don't be upset. Her mother-in-law understood her state. Henry will recover, and everything will be fine. Yes, Brooke agreed. In reality, she wanted to scream out of helplessness. Upon arriving home from the hospital, Brooke secluded herself in her room. Eliza knocked on the door a few times, but Brooke pretended to be asleep. In truth, she didn't want to talk to anyone right now. She needed to think everything through thoroughly. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. Looking at the caller ID, Brooke sighed. It was James. She really didn't want to talk to him. He couldn't offer her anything new. Brooke didn't want to be disappointed any further. She realized that she had already given in to Emma's persuasions and had found herself in a difficult situation. "Mom, I need to talk to you." Eliza called from outside the door. Brooke heard her daughter knocking a few times, but Brooke kept pretending she was resting. "Mom, I know you're not sleeping." "Eliza, let's talk later," Brooke suggested. She needed to plan her actions. "No, Mom, we're talking now," the girl demanded in a determined tone. "I won't leave until we've figured everything out." Brooke emerged from her bedroom. "Let's go to the kitchen." The woman walked past her daughter. "Let's have some tea and talk." In the kitchen, Brooke brewed tea. She sat at the table and looked at her daughter. "Eliza, I'm listening closely." The woman leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms over her chest. "Mom, The girl didn't know how to start the conversation. "Just tell me honestly, what have you decided about Dad?" "Honestly," Brooke clarified, "I'm thinking about how to divorce your father. I don't want to pretend to be a forgiving woman anymore." "Is this because of James?" The woman saw that her daughter was starting to get angry. "No, it's because of your father," Brooke defended herself. "James has absolutely nothing to do with this." "Are you sure?" With every passing minute, Eliza was getting more and more angry. "I saw you being friendly in the cafeteria." "And what else did you see?" The woman tried to keep herself composed, not to shout at her daughter. "What in our gestures and words made you think that James and I could be together?" "Well, you were sitting, talking." Eliza frowned, trying to recall something improper in her mother's behavior with her companion. "And," Brooke smiled. "What did I do that was improper?" "Nothing." The girl sighed. "But that doesn't mean anything. If you leave Dad, it means you've chosen this doctor." "No, honey, at one point, it was your father who had the choice to betray me or not." Brooke chuckled. "I don't have that choice. I'm just doing what I should. Namely, I'm divorcing him. And I'm choosing freedom. But who will take care of Dad?" Eliza was taken aback by her mother's decision. "His children," Brooke shrugged. "That means you and Noah. You have no right to abandon Dad in such a state." Unexpectedly, the girl shouted. "Why not?" The woman shrugged. "I'm a pregnant woman who only needs positive emotions. Seeing your father is just a constant source of negativity. Notice that I'm not saying this because of his illness." Brooke stood up and left the table. She poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of her daughter. "And you?" Eliza was shocked. "I'm going to take care of my own affairs," Brooke said, trying not to burst into tears. Could it be that even her own children didn't understand her? "You think about it. Who's right among us? Just like your father, I have the right to choose. And it concerns not only my family life, but also my personal life." The woman left the kitchen quickly. 10 minutes later, dressed and ready, she left the apartment quietly. Brooke wanted to take a walk. She had decided for herself that she needed to make a firm decision about the situation. First and foremost, regardless of what choice the woman made, it had to be her decision, regardless of whether her children approved it or not. 10 minutes later, her phone rang. "Yes, Noah, I'm listening carefully," Brooke said. "Mom, what are you doing?" Noah shouted into the receiver. "Dad isn't feeling well. and he needs positive emotions. Well, he has you and your sister for that. Brooke smiled. Mom, you dare not divorce Dad. The young man ordered. In reality, Noah was concerned about his own happiness. If his father were free, Elsie would never agree to be with Noah. And by staying married, the young man at least had a small chance to be with the woman he loved. Noah, let me handle this myself, Brooke said firmly. But, Mom, but the woman didn't hear her son, as she had turned off her phone. She was shocked by her children's behavior. Initially, they both took her side regarding the divorce, and now they were demanding that she stay with her husband and take care of him. And what Brooke wanted, of course, no one had asked. How she longed to express herself. At that moment, James called her again, but Brooke had no desire to talk to him. What for? Unconsciously, she arrived at her mother's house. Without much thought, Brooke went inside to see Jessica. Mom, I hope you understand me. Sobbing against the old woman's chest, Brooke asked. Honey, I'll tell you one thing. Jessica stroked Brooke's head. Remember, we only have one life. If you've decided to get a divorce, then do it. Don't listen to anyone else. And as for your children, don't worry about them. They'll understand you with time. You think so? Sniffled Brooke. At least someone supported her in this matter. Yes, Jessica nodded. Moreover, they're Henry's children. Let them take care of their father, creating positive emotions for him. Thank you, Mom. Empowered by her mother's words, Brooke decided to go to the hospital right away to talk to Henry. Yes, she wasn't refusing to help him, but only as an ex-wife. Nothing more. In the hospital corridor, James caught up with her. Why aren't you answering my calls? The man asked. I'm sorry. I just wasn't in the mood. Brooke shrugged. Besides, I know perfectly well what you might want to say. I think you don't. James smiled. Your husband is a liar and a deceiver. Brooke smirked. Today, everyone seemed intent on telling her things she didn't know. Lately, she had realized who she had spent 25 years of her life with. Undoubtedly, Henry was a wonderful man. When it came to family matters, she could unquestionably rely on him. But when it came to fidelity, you think I should know this? That's why you called me. Brooke shook her head. Yes, your husband is using his illness to invoke your pity. James was serious, more than ever. I don't know where you got this information, but this morning Henry's attending physician made it clear that my husband is seriously ill. Brooke said with pain in her voice. And he needs rehabilitation, preferably in the company of close and beloved people. Come, let me show you something. James abruptly turned around and headed toward the ward where Henry was. He didn't even check if Brooke would follow him. He knew she would. After all, it was important for her to find out what James meant when he said that her husband was a liar. James, can we slow down a bit? Brooke requested, slightly out of breath. She was struggling to keep up with her friend's pace. We can, but then we miss the most important part. The man explained without turning around. Brooke, after our conversation today, I talked to Michael again, and he told me a lot of interesting things. Like what? The woman was intrigued. For example, that you're apparently pregnant by another man. James smirked. And you're a good actress. You pretended so skillfully as if your husband had cheated on you. I don't understand. Brooke's eyes darkened at what she heard. She leaned against a windowsill, struggling to catch her breath. Are you okay? James supported her. I don't understand why Henry leaked. Brooke, breathing heavily, asked and looked at her friend. To get Michael to help him. The man smiled. Help him with what? Brooke was bewildered. If Michael tells you that your husband is seriously ill, you'll stay with him out of guilt and won't ruin the family. James sighed. He remembered Michael's face when he found out he had been brazenly and dirtily used. He immediately wanted to storm into Henry's room to give him a piece of his mind. But James convinced him not to. Instead, he proposed exposing the unfaithful husband. He had tried to call Brooke and invite her to the hospital. However, she wasn't answering her calls. James had considered going to her, but he saw her through the window. He immediately sent Michael to Henry with a serious conversation and waited for Brooke to tell her everything. So, what should we do now? Brooke asked, regaining her composure. Right now, we'll quietly enter the room and listen to what Michael and your husband are talking about, James said in a conspiratorial tone. Brooke nodded in agreement. The pair quietly approached the ward and entered it. There was a small corridor in front of the large room, which led to the bathroom. That's where Brooke and James stood to avoid being noticed by Henry. Brooke took out her phone and started recording a video. Henry, how could you deceive me like this? Michael was outraged. I don't understand what you're talking about. The patient shrugged. You told me that your wife cheated on you, but you didn't want to break up the family. So I agreed to play along, telling your loved ones that you are seriously ill. The doctor continued. I thought it was noble of you. Nowadays, it's rare to find such a man. I really don't want to lose my wife, Henry agreed. Is it my fault? Yes, but you didn't mention that in this case, the infidelity was on your part. Michael was angry. And your lover turned out to be your wife's friend. Doctor, maybe it's time to stop spreading hospital gossip, Henry condescendingly requested. Gossip? The doctor was simply exasperated. That's it. Your husband is done for, James whispered to Brooke. He has completely provoked Michael. Gossip, Michael repeated, trying to control his emotions. And are you aware that your beloved Elsie came to me and asked me to do everything possible to help you recover? Because, strangely enough, she's also expecting your child. Michael, please understand me correctly. Henry stood up from the bed and approached the table, pouring himself a glass of tea that Em had brought for him. At that moment, my wife and I had a strained relationship, and Elsie happened to be there at the right time. A very convenient excuse. The doctor smirked. Doctor, understand me correctly. I'm not justifying myself in any way, the patient said and took a big sip of tea. I constantly blame myself for succumbing to that temptation. If it weren't for my infidelity, my wife and I would be preparing for the birth of our baby. So why did you deceive me? Michael didn't understand. My wife will never be able to forgive me for infidelity, Henry sighed. And if I'm ill, Brooke won't leave me. During this time, while I'm in rehabilitation, I'll make sure she forgives me. Are you sure about that? The doctor frowned. Yes. Son, are you standing up? Emma's voice echoed in the room. And your hand. The woman froze, examining her son who was standing firmly on his feet, holding a glass in his right hand. Mom, what are you doing here? Henry asked irritably. He understood that things weren't going according to plan. After all, Emma couldn't stand people who told lies, and that meant that Brooke would find out everything soon. Consequently, his wife would divorce him quickly. You came to visit him. Emma couldn't believe her eyes. Michael, what's going on with Henry? Everything's fine. The doctor sighed. He's recovering quickly. My goodness, what a joy. The woman approached her son and hugged him. Mom, I need to talk to you. Henry was irritated. I need you not to tell Brooke anything. Why? Emma was taken aback. Because, as Michael said, this is a temporary effect. The man said the first thing that came to his mind. Everything could go back if there's not proper rehabilitation, right, doctor? Anything is possible. Michael answered. The man didn't know what to do. On one hand, he wanted Brooke to know the whole truth about her husband. But on the other hand, he realized that in that case, the child would grow up without a father. And that's not good. Michael decided to take some time to think. All right, I'll go. See you tomorrow. The doctor quickly left the room. He needed to be alone with his thoughts. Passing by the slightly ajar door to the shower room, Michael didn't even notice Brooke and James hiding inside. At that moment, the glass that Henry was holding slipped from his hand. Son, what's happening? Emmy asked with a worried tone. She looked at her son with horror. My hand, Henry whispered. I can't feel it again. Son, hold on, my dear. The woman fussed around Henry. She helped him to the bed and laid him down. I'll clean everything up now. Mom, don't say anything to Brooke, Henry softly requested, taking the woman's hand. Son, whatever Emma replied, Brooke and James didn't hear. They quickly left the room, so the elderly woman wouldn't catch them there. Brooke was raging around the surgeon's office. She desperately wanted to express to her husband everything she thought about him. Not only did Michael lie about her supposed infidelity, but now he also made his own mother hide the truth about his health. You understand how Henry has completely tangled himself up, Brooke ranted, pacing around the surgeon's office. He didn't hesitate to involve Michael in his deception, and now even his own mother. Brooke, maybe he really is afraid of losing you, James speculated. So he's inventing, in his mind, the perfect way out of this situation. James, if Henry really wanted that, he would be trying to fix the situation instead. Brooke was angry with her husband. He wouldn't be coming up with all this nonsense. That's the extent of his imagination, I guess. James shrugged. Unexpectedly, Brooke burst into laughter. For the first time in days, she felt light. She could finally file for divorce with a clear conscience, and no one would be able to blame her for it. Brooke, are you okay? The man asked with concern. Yes, James, can you imagine? She replied, feeling a bit calmer. She breathed a sigh of relief, as if she had lifted a heavy burden off her shoulders. I finally feel like myself again. I'm no longer a puppet in Henry's game. Brooke, this deserves a celebration, James suggested. Unexpectedly, his face turned red. What happened? She frowned, noticing his reaction. I can't tonight. The man was awkward in this situation. I have a date. You met a woman and you're keeping it quiet. Brooke was happy for her friend. James, congratulations. Thanks. He smiled modestly. Why were you silent about it? She wanted to know more about James' relationship. Who is she? What does she do? She's young and beautiful. The man's face turned serious. And I was silent because there's not much to talk about yet. We just got to know each other. But she's captured my heart. James sighed dreamily. Then he looked at his friend. Brooke, don't be upset, all right? James, what's there to be upset about? Brooke smiled. Thanks for understanding. James walked her to the door. All right. Now you go home and rest. We'll talk tomorrow morning, and you can tell me what you've decided about your situation. All right. Brooke left the surgeon's office. The woman smiled. She was incredibly happy for her friend. James was a good and decent man who deserved a wonderful woman by his side. Someone who would love both him and the job he cherished. And things were finally falling into place in her own life as well. Now she could file for divorce without any guilt or hesitation. Brooke, what are you doing here? She heard a voice behind her unexpectedly. Turning around, she saw Emma. Did you come to see Henry? No, I came for a checkup with my doctor. Brooke quickly came up with an excuse on the spot. She didn't plan to reveal her situation to her mother-in-law prematurely. Did you visit your son? Yes, I did. Emma sighed. She looked at Brooke, contemplating whether to tell her the truth about her son's health. She realized that if she told the truth, Brooke would immediately divorce Henry without a second thought. And that's something her son wouldn't be able to bear. On the other hand, if she stayed silent, how would she face Brooke and her mother Jessica? And how is he feeling? Brooke asked with a concerned tone. She saw the torment in her mother-in-law's eyes and wondered whether Emma would tell her the truth or not. Simultaneously, she scolded Henry for putting his mother in such an awkward position. He's getting better. The older woman decided not to reveal the truth. Maybe Henry was right, and by helping her husband with his rehabilitation, Brooke would forgive him. I'm really glad to hear that. The young woman smiled. Brooke, remember how much you loved each other. Emma suddenly took Brooke's hand and spoke softly. Yes, we did, Brooke confirmed. But Henry ruined everything with his actions. You see, Emma, Henry cheated on me for a year, and he did it without a shred of guilt. To me, someone who cheats is like a dirty rag. I always told Henry that if he fell in love with another woman, he should tell me right away. Love, my foot, it's just hormones. The older woman waved her hand. But what about your child? Emma made another attempt to convince Brooke not to divorce her son. The baby needs both parents. I'm not preventing Henry from seeing the child. Brooke smiled. Just like I'm not preventing you. She embraced her mother-in-law's shoulders. Emma, I love you. You are an exception to the rule. Usually, mothers-in-law hate their sons' wives. But you, on the contrary, always defended me and took my side in our arguments with Henry. I'm so grateful to you for that. Brooke, forgive me, the woman whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't decide what to do, to tell or not to tell. Seeing Emma's torment, Brooke decided to relieve her. I have an idea, Brooke suggested. I'm incredibly hungry. How about we go to a cafe and have dinner? All right. Emma sighed. What a wonderful daughter-in-law she had. Let me call Jessica. Let her join us too. And I'll call Eliza, so she can join us as well. Brooke pulled out her phone and started dialing her daughter's number. Mom, I can't talk right now. The girl's voice sounded happy on the other end of the call. I'm on a date. On a date. Brooke was surprised. But the woman didn't manage to say anything more, as the ringing interrupted her. Eliza declined the call. What did Eliza say? Em asked. seeing Brooke's bewildered expression. She won't come, as she's on a date. Brooke was concerned. Since when did her daughter have a boyfriend? And why didn't she know about it? What kind of mother was she? Brooke, don't be upset. Everything will be fine. The older woman smiled. Remember, Eliza is already 20 years old. At your age, you already had a 1-year-old Noah. That's exactly what I remember. Brooke sighed. Goodness, how quickly her children had grown up. Let's go. Your mom will arrive soon. Emma took Brooke's hand. Yes, it would be a shame if Brooke stopped communicating with her after the divorce. Arriving at the cafe, Brooke felt a bit calmer. After all, her daughter was smart and sensible. And Eliza is just going on a date. Yet her mother was acting as if she were going crazy. Entering the cafe, Brooke saw her mother sitting at one of the tables. She was gesturing to her daughter and Emma to be quiet and cautious. What happened? Brooke asked worriedly, approaching her mother. Look. Jessica nodded towards the opposite side of the cafe. When Brooke turned around, she understood the reason for her mother's concern. What do you see? Emmy asked. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw Noah sitting at a table with a woman, holding her hand. I see. Brooke frowned. She didn't understand why her mother was worried. Only when the woman turned around did Brooke realize the truth. Elsie. Brooke sat down at the table to steady herself. What on earth was happening? Why was Noah sitting at a table with Elsie? Why was he holding her hand? What could they possibly have in common? I'm appalled. Emma exclaimed. Since she couldn't get the father, now she's going after the son. I'll give her a piece of my mind, Jessica said angrily, getting up from her seat. Hold on, grandmas, calm down, Brooke said firmly. I'll handle this. The young woman stood up and walked over to Noah. Noah, Brooke smiled, approaching her son. What are you doing here? Mom. The young man blushed upon seeing Brooke. Hi. He looked flustered. He clearly hadn't expected to see his mother here, especially not in the company of Elsie. Noah invited me to dinner, Elsie interjected. And since I'm a lonely woman, I decided not to turn down such an offer. Mom, let me explain later. Noah looked at Brooke with a pleading expression, but she didn't notice. Right now, she needed to find out what Elsie wanted from Noah, and if necessary, protect her child from this predator. It didn't matter that Noah was a young man who could stand up for himself. Why later? Brooke shrugged. She sat down next to her son at the table. The atmosphere here in the cafe is very cozy, conducive to revelations. Do you want to hear the truth? Brooke could see that Elsie was clearly mocking her. I'm sorry, but no one's asking you, lady. Brooke smiled. I'm having a conversation with my son. I'm not interested in the opinions of people like you. Too bad, Elsie smirked. You should be more gentle with me. And why would that be? Brooke scoffed. Women who sleep with other women's husbands don't deserve respect. Mom. Noah tried to stop Brooke from insulting his beloved. I want to thank you and Henry, Elsie continued with a smile. You raised an honorable son, unlike his father. What do you mean? Brooke frowned. She knew Elsie too well and understood exactly what that smile meant. Noah proposed to me to marry him, so my child can be born into a complete family. Elsie displayed triumph in her every move. He wants my baby to have a father. Noah, what have you done? Saying that Brooke was shocked would be an understatement. She was in complete disbelief. "Mom, I've loved Elsie for a long time." The young man's tone was resolute. "And I want to be with her. Aren't you bothered by the fact that she was your father's mistress?" Brooke couldn't calm down in any way. "No." Noah remained calm. "Mom, please understand. I'll only be happy with Elsie. Please don't stand in the way of our happiness." "Elsie, do you even realize how absurd this is?" Brooke turned to her former friend. "After all, Noah grew up right before your eyes. You know, dear, I've always wanted to be loved even just a little bit, the way your husband loved you." Elsie's smile didn't leave her face. "And now, finally, my dream has come true. You couldn't create a family with Henry, so you went after my son. But you don't love Noah." Brooke was desperate. She wanted to hold her son tightly and not let go until he realized he was making a mistake. "I have feelings for him," Elsie admitted. "And with time, I'll grow to love him. Maybe." Brooke quickly stood up from the table and was about to grab Elsie by the hair to pull her out of the cafe away from her son. But Noah preempted his mother's actions. He took Brooke and escorted her to the bar counter. "Mom, let me make my own choices in life," Noah said firmly. "If I have even a small chance to be with Elsie, I'll take it. But she's not worthy of you. This is my choice." The young man's tone was resolute. "Mom, I've been offered a job in another city. Elsie and I have decided to move there far away from everyone. Sweetie, let's go." Elsie, who had approached, took Noah's hand and led him out of the cafe, leaving Brooke standing near the bar counter. She felt devastated and crushed. "What happened, honey?" Jessica was concerned about her daughter's appearance. "Brooke, what did Noah tell you?" Emma handed her a glass of water. "Noah's marrying Elsie." Brooke couldn't believe she was saying that. And how could she even entertain such nonsense? "Well, that's surprising," Jessica sighed. "All right, we need to neutralize this Elsie urgently," Emma said decisively. The next morning, Brooke went to the hospital to talk to her husband about the situation involving their son and Elsie. "Brooke, my love." Henry smiled upon seeing his wife. "Hello. It's so nice of you to come visit me. I was starting to think that a disabled husband wasn't needed by you." "Henry, I know perfectly well that you're healthy." Brooke interrupted Henry sharply. She didn't want to engage in any unnecessary discussions. The only thing bothering her right now was Noah's impending wedding. She didn't even ask about Eliza's date yesterday. All her thoughts were consumed by her son. "Well, if you consider that my right side isn't functioning." The man pouted. "Stop it," Brooke sharply interrupted her husband. "I don't have time for your manipulations with your health right now." She took out her phone and showed Henry a video where he was talking to Michael. "I need to have a serious conversation with you. I won't let you divorce me," Henry said firmly, realizing that his wife had every moral right to file for divorce. "In court, 3 months from now, I'll still get it." Brooke was on the verge of hysteria. Noah has decided to marry Elsie so her child won't grow up without a father. We need to address this issue as a priority. "What does that have to do with me?" The man looked at his wife with a puzzled expression. "For me, it seems like the most optimal solution. Let's say Elsie is settled and won't meddle in our family anymore." "Are you serious?" Brooke whispered. Her voice disappeared from indignation. "Why does Noah have to sacrifice himself for your convenience?" "Well, I didn't ask him to do that. The man shrugged. Aren't you bothered that your son is about to marry that Elsie? Brooke was utterly outraged. A little more and she herself might have a stroke. It's his choice. Henry shrugged. He's a grown-up boy. Are you serious right now? Brooke whispered. You won't even do anything to spare our son from this mistake. What do you want from me? The man looked at his wife attentively. Just solve this problem already. The woman yelled. Learn to take responsibility for your actions. All right. I'll make sure Elsie stays away from our son. Henry suggested. Thank God your common sense prevailed. Brooke sighed in relief. But you'll always be with me for that, regardless of what status we have. Brooke was stunned by her husband's ultimatum. What did he mean by regardless of what status? What do you mean? Furrowing her brows, Brooke asked. You perfectly understand that Elsie will demand that I be married to her. Henry explained, triumphantly looking at his wife. And I love you, and I don't want to lose you. Are you saying that you are offering me the role of a mistress? The woman's eyes widened. She didn't expect such audacity. Why a mistress? The man shrugged. They beloved woman. At that moment, Brooke received a message on her phone from James, informing her that he had urgent information for her. I need to think about it, Brooke replied. Of course, she had expected that Henry wouldn't rush to rescue their son. But she couldn't have anticipated that he would propose such a degrading condition. Think, but not for too long. Henry smiled. My proposal has an expiration date. In reality, he was eagerly awaiting his wife's decision. He hoped that everything would go back to the way it was. If everything turned out exactly as he planned, it would be the perfect outcome for him. Henry could already imagine spending all his free time with Brooke, leaving only a negligible portion of his attention for Elsie. With disgust, Brooke looked at her husband. How could she have loved him all these 25 years and not notice what a despicable person he was? Had Henry always been like this? Why hadn't she seen it? She left the hospital room and sat down on a bench in the corridor. She needed a moment to collect herself. Brooke took out her phone and dialed James' number. Yes, I'm listening, the man replied. James, it's me. Brooke was glad to hear her friend's voice. I'm at the hospital. I'll be free in about 30 minutes. From James' voice, it was clear that he was busy. Please wait for me. All right. I'll have some tea at the cafeteria in the meantime. Brooke ended the call. Sitting at the table and sipping her hot tea, Brooke scrolled through the news feed on her phone. She was waiting for James to call her. Unexpectedly, she heard a familiar female voice. Turning her head, Brooke saw her daughter talking cheerfully to Michael. She sighed. Listen, won't your parents give me a hard time when they find out we're dating? Michael asked, sounding concerned. I'm a grown-up girl already, and I don't need their approval, Eliza replied, raising her chin. And I have children, Brooke thought. One loves a 42-year-old woman. The other found herself a suitor who treats her father well. At least Michael is 27 years old, and he's only slightly older than Eliza. That's something to be glad about. Eliza, I've known you for almost 3 weeks now, and I'm very glad about it. I want to say that our happiness was aided by misfortune. Michael smiled. And yet you are right, Eliza reassured her beloved. If my dad hadn't ended up in the hospital, who knows if we would have met or not? I can't wait for tonight to see you again. The young man ran his hand along the girl's cheek. By the way, does your mom suspect who you're dating? My mom has been busy with her own things lately. The girl scoffed. She couldn't care less about me or my personal life. Well, that makes sense. Michael chuckled. If my husband was pulling stints like this with his illness, I wouldn't be up for deep conversations either. My dad just loves my mom and doesn't want her to leave him. Eliza shrugged. Stop, Brooke thought with a frown. So, Eliza knew about Henry's charade and stayed silent. How is that possible? Why? Suddenly, Michael's phone rang. After the conversation, he abruptly stood up from the table. Gotta go, the young man said quickly. I'll be back soon. He turned off his phone and looked at his companion. Sweetie, I have to run. It's an emergency call. I understand. Go ahead. The girl sighed. See you tonight. The young man kissed Eliza on the cheek and quickly left the cafeteria. Brooke watched Michael leave, then shifted her gaze to her daughter, who sat with a dreamy smile on her face. She could tell Eliza was in love. Brooke decided to talk to her daughter. Hello, Eliza? Smiling, the woman approached the table. Did you come to visit Dad? Yes, Mom. Brooke could see that her daughter was flustered. But I decided to have some coffee first. Yes, right from 2 cups. The woman nodded to the table where the dishes were. It just worked out that way. Eliza blushed. Have you seen Dad yet? How did you assume that? Brooke sat down next to her daughter, where Michael had been just a while ago. Well, when I was leaving home, you weren't here anymore. Eliza shrugged. Sweetie, is there something you want to tell me? Brooke asked softly. She understood that such a serious conversation shouldn't happen within the walls of a hospital cafeteria. But after recent events, her nerves were on edge. What do you mean? The girl's face flushed, and there was a hint of fear in her eyes. Eliza, I know everything, Brooke stated firmly. She could see that panic was starting to set in for her daughter. Eliza was wondering just how much her mother knew. What do you mean? Eliza asked, trying to gauge how much her mother knew about the events in question. I'm talking about your relationship with Michael, about the deception involving your father's health. Brooke started listing. Do you want me to continue? How did you? The girl was shocked. How do you know all of this? It just turned out that way. Brooke waved her hand dismissively. Suddenly, a thought crossed Brooke's mind to leave things as they were. If Noah wants to marry his father's pregnant lover, that's his business. If Eliza continues to lie at every turn, Brooke won't interfere. If Henry wants to conveniently play the sick card, then please do so without her. Brooke silently stood up from the table and walked out of the cafeteria. Eliza shouted something after her mother, but Brooke didn't hear. She had grown tired of being convenient for everyone, especially when it was needed by others, not her. That's it. It was time for her to focus on herself and her future child. Brooke walked out of the hospital building and sat on a bench. Inside her, there was emptiness. Not even a single thought crossed her mind. Suddenly, her phone rang. Hello, Brooke answered emotionlessly. I'm free now, and I can meet up with you, James said in a cheerful tone. I'm outside near the hospital. Brooke sighed. I'll be there soon. James hung up the phone. 10 minutes later, a young man walked out of the hospital building. Seeing Brooke, he quickly approached her. How are you? Noticing his friend's state, James asked. I'm fine. Brooke waved her hand. How was your date last night? Let's talk about that later. James' tone was serious. I want to tell you something very important. I understand that I'm about to breach medical confidentiality, but I believe you should know. What happened? Brooke looked at her friend wearily. Elsie has stage 2 cancer. Brooke thought she must have misheard. How could a healthy 42-year-old woman have cancer? I don't understand anything. Brooke shook her head. Despite the anger she felt towards Elsie, she didn't wish such a fate upon her. But she's pregnant. I won't burden you with medical terms, but they will have to terminate Elsie's pregnancy. James sighed. He remembered the look on Brooke's face when she learned the news. There was so much pain and desperation in her eyes. How did Elsie find out about her diagnosis? Brooke sighed. Her pregnancy prompted a thorough examination, during which the cancer was discovered. At first, the doctor had doubts, but after reviewing all the test results and consulting with colleagues, they confirmed the diagnosis. The man looked at his companion. Brooke appeared pale. How are you feeling? Me? It seemed as if Brooke was surprised by James asking this question. Why should she matter when Elsie was going through such problems? Suddenly, Brooke realized how relative everything in this world was. Just 10 minutes ago, she was furious with her former friend, and now she was ready to go to her to offer support. And all of her own problems seemed so trivial compared to the loss of a long-awaited child. James, I'm going. Brooke stood up abruptly. Where? The man was taken aback. To Elsie's. Brooke replied with a puzzled tone. Wasn't it obvious that her friend needed support right now? Are you sure? James asked with doubt. Maybe it would be better to give Elsie some time to collect herself. No, I need to go right now, Brooke insisted stubbornly. I want Elsie to know that she's not alone, that she can always turn to me for help. If anything happens, call me, the man cautioned. Okay. Brooke headed towards her car. 30 minutes later, she was standing outside her friend's apartment. Gradually, her determination began to melt away. What could Brooke say to Elsie to calm her? There were no words to ease the pain of a mother losing her child. Brooke knew how much her friend wanted to become a mother. She rang the doorbell. When the door opened, Brooke's eyes widened in horror. Before her stood a disheveled and tear-streaked Elsie. Her makeup was smidged all over her face. What do you want? Elsie snapped angrily, not noticing the tears streaming down her face. I know everything, Brooke whispered, trying not to cry. She needed to be strong to support her friend. What, did you come to gloat? The words, like poison, spewed from the apartment's owner. The rival is defeated. She's struck with a deadly illness. Now your hubby will stay with you, and Noah will leave me. Elsie, I came here to help, Brooke said, her throat tightening. How can I help? Elsie continued to be angry. It seemed as if the whole world was to blame for her illness. My God, you're such a fool, Brooke whispered. She approached her friend and embraced her. In that moment, she realized she had forgiven Elsie. After all, her health was so much more important than petty grievances. Unexpectedly, the apartment owner's resistance softened, and she didn't resist the hug. Brooke, forgive me, Elsie sobbed in her voice. It's my punishment for getting involved in someone else's family and ruining it. I've longed so much to be in your shoes, and in the end, I lost the most precious thing I had, my child. I don't want to live without my child. Brooke comforted her friend, not noticing her own tears. Who could have thought that fate would take such a turn in their lives, and that Brooke would find herself sitting on the hallway floor, comforting a sobbing Elsie on her knees. "Elsie, the most important thing is not to worry," Brooke whispered to her friend. "First and foremost, you need to focus on your health and defeat this illness. But how am I supposed to live without my child afterwards?" Elsie was on the brink of despair. She had already bought so many beautiful things for her baby, imagining them strolling outside together in those outfits. "Elsie, do you remember the twin girls who came to our kindergarten?" Brooke suddenly recalled. "The ones with red hair." The apartment owner frowned, remembering the girls. "Yes, like two little red kittens." Brooke smiled. "Did you know they were adopted? They were taken from an orphanage." "Where are you going with this?" Elsie sniffled, although she was beginning to suspect where her friend was heading. "There are so many abandoned children in our country who dream of a mother's love and care." Brooke realized she was on the right track. And you could provide that love to a child, make a little one happy. "Do you really think so?" A glimmer of hope finally appeared in Elsie's eyes. "I do." Brooke nodded. Now that her friend had a purpose, she would fight for her life. "Brooke, please forgive me." Elsie looked into her friend's eyes. It was important to her that the guest harbored no ill will. "I destroyed your family, left a child without a father. Honestly, I need to thank you." Brooke smiled. "Why?" Elsie was taken aback by her friend's words. "This whole situation opened my eyes to my husband." The guest chuckled. "Henry was always selfish and loved, first and foremost, only himself. And then me and the children. I used to think that's how it should be. Yes, my husband was generous with gifts, took care of me in front of others, helped out, but in reality," Brooke sighed. "Often after dinner, Henry would just get up from the table and go to the bedroom, leaving all the dishes on the table. I never would have thought he was like that." Elsie was astonished. "I don't know why, but I saw it as the norm." The young woman smiled. "Only now do I realize that I live like a zombie, under the spell of my beloved husband. Brooke, thank you for being there for me." 3 years passed. Brooke was walking with little Lily down the street. It was clear she was nervous. Emma and Jessica sat on a bench nearby, animatedly discussing the latest news. "Mom, what's taking so long?" Eliza asked, glancing at Brooke. "I don't know." The woman sighed. "They should have come out by now. Did we come late?" Unexpectedly, Michael's voice came from behind. Turning around, Brooke saw her daughter's fiancé accompanied by James and his wife, Madison. Brooke was happy for her friend. Madison was a wonderful woman who supported her husband in everything and was his pillar of support. "No, you're not late." Eliza approached the groom and kissed him. "Why is it taking so long?" James asked. He walked up to Lily and picked her up. "You're my good girl," he said in an affectionate tone. James was the godfather of the girl. "You're my sweetie." "We don't know." Brooke shrugged. "We're starting to worry ourselves." "Well, while they're not here, maybe we can discuss the upcoming event a bit," Eliza suggested, referring to her wedding with Michael. "Later, we won't have time for that, and there will be a lot of decisions to make." "Did you manage to reach your dad?" Brooke asked. The thing was, when Henry realized his wife wouldn't return to him, he decided there was nothing left for him in this town. especially since somehow information about his pseudo-consequences after his illness leaked to the factory where he worked. Everyone started talking about it, mostly in an ironic way. So Henry decided to leave for another city. He cut off all contact with his children, considering them traitors. His mother didn't go with him, even though he invited her. Emma chose to stay, because that's where Brooke and her grandchildren were. Her only son was seriously offended by her for that. No. Eliza smiled sadly. After her parents' divorce, she hadn't seen her father again. It's a pity that Henry's ambitions overcame his feelings. Look, here they come. Madison smiled. From the doors of the orphanage came a happy Elsie and Noah, in whose arms was a little bundle tied with a blue ribbon. Of course, Brooke never completely approved of her son's choice, but Noah showed persistence, making it clear that Elsie was his only woman. Thanks to Noah's love and Brooke's support, Elsie managed to overcome her serious illness. After that, she and her husband Noah decided to adopt a child. After going through all the necessary procedures, they finally managed to bring the little bundle of joy home. "Look, my friend, how adorable he is," Elsie whispered, gazing at the baby's face. Overwhelmed by happiness and love for her son, her head was spinning. "Our Leo." Brooke just smiled, not saying anything. She looked at the people present, who were admiring the new family member. The woman was happy that now she was surrounded only by devoted and beloved people who would never break her heart again.